everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Greg Estes, and I work for Nvidia. I run our media and entertainment business, and I have the distinct honor to introduce our next speaker. And I'm going to look at my notes just because if you know Doug Trumbull, his resume would take me a good 20 minutes if I just hit all the highlights and groundbreaking achievements that he's made. So I'll try to be succinct. Most of you know that Doug is a visionary filmmaker and an innovator and an entrepreneur in a variety of ways. People like Doug that have made an impact in the industry that he has are so rare, and it's worth noting a few of his achievements. Doug started his early work back on 2001, A Space Odyssey, as one of the effects supervisors there, and that led to groundbreaking work, some of the most treasured films of all time in terms of effects and the films themselves, of course. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Star Trek, Blade Runner, just to name a few. That led Doug to doing directing himself as well. Films like Silent Running and Brainstorm. And then, ever restless, he turned his attention to a new area of ride films, connecting to audiences with filmmaking expertise in a new and innovative way, including the Back to the Future. The Ride was one of the first ride films there, which also led him to taking his company and merging into and working with IMAX. So yet again, you have an example of bringing new kinds of cinematic experiences to users. Was there for the IMAX IPO and really expanding IMAX's presence worldwide. But Doug wasn't done there. He also did a lot of early work in virtual sets, working with Disney on some early programming there for television based around real-time graphics. And throughout this career, always pushing, always innovating, that has led to many, many awards for Doug, not the least of which is an Academy Award honoring his body of work. With a resume like that, most of you probably already know Doug even coming in, and I'll just tell you a quick story. I had the honor of introducing Doug at an event that we did at NAB a year ago, and that night I had the CEOs or senior executives of 3 different major companies in the industry come up to me and say, "Thank you so much for having Doug here. Doug is the reason that I got into special effects and into this business in the first place. And since I was here today, I've had 3 more people tell me that." Wouldn't it be great if all of us had that kind of an impact as we look back on our careers? So with that, I'll ask that you give me a warm welcome to Doug Trumbull.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you all for coming. Particular thanks to Tom Kay for being instrumental in roping me into this, and thanks to everybody at Nvidia. I'm here today because we are continuing to push the envelope in a new kind of cinematic experience, and we're really grateful to Nvidia because we're really using a number of Nvidia products to help us do what we're trying to do. I did some of this presentation at NAB last year with Nvidia. It's changed a little bit, and what we were talking about doing then, we are doing now. We have a film that's a demo. It's probably going to be a 10 or 12-minute demo film that's actually in the can right now. We're in post-production. We're doing the visual effects and all the tricky stuff. And we're in post-production hell, as you might imagine. Shooting a movie at 120 frames a second at 4K and 3D is a ton of data. So I'm going to show, near the end of this, I'm going to show you a little behind the scenes that was just shot last week at our studio of what's going on, so you can get a feeling for what we're doing. And I'm going to try to do a presentation that will kind of lead up to that, why we're doing it, why I'm doing it, why I'm so crazily passionate about it. This image is a very preliminary conceptual design for a lobby of a movie theater complex. Our design for a movie theater is quite different from normal movie theaters. I'm working on ideas where the screen is almost halfway between a rectangular flat screen and a planetarium. It's deeply curved, it's very, very wide, it's systematically designed as an optical system so there's no cross-reflectance. It multiplies the brightness of the image, and it creates a 3D experience that is really very, very powerful. So we're pushing the bandwidth envelope. We're going to be projecting this film at 120 frames using a single Christie digital projector, using a 3-reality TS5 3D rig we're shooting with, Canon C500 cameras, Real D 3D system. And in raw form, that's about 12 megabytes of frame times 2 for 2 cameras. So it's 11.8 gigabytes a second of data coming out of our system. And right now, for this little 10-minute demo, we have 11.5 terabytes of storage. And I wanted to thank Intel for helping us with some storage solutions just recently, because we're putting this whole thing together on a shoestring. We're doing it all ourselves. Many talented people, some of whom are in this room, are contributing their time and their energy and their skills to help us accomplish this goal, which is something that the movie industry is not interested in doing or hearing about. And while I've been talking about this for several years, and particularly a lot lately, I still haven't received one phone call from a major studio or major theater chain. So what you're going to see here is kind of outside the box. My objective is to make movies that make you as an audience feel like you're inside the movie. You're not just looking at a movie, it becomes a very participatory experience. And it's going to be hopefully a first-person experience rather than a third-person experience. And I'll explain that as I go along. And the objective of the whole system, by making the image extremely sharp, extremely bright, with extremely high color saturation, at extremely high frame rate, with no blurring, no strobing, no flickering, and a very, very wide field of view, is to make a window onto reality. And this window onto reality creates a whole new dynamic relationship between the audience and the movie, which is completely unconventional. And I'm going to try to explain that, and I'm going to show you some clips that explain it better than I can explain it, because a picture is more powerful than anything I can say. Anyway, I tentatively call it something like a holodeck, for lack of a better expression. It's like a movie, but it's also like a hologram. The experience is as though what's happening is absolutely real and happening to you, not happening through empathy with another character. It's happening directly to the audience. So the whole dynamic shifts in terms of the relationship of the camera and the actors and what's going on the screen. So one of my heroes recently is Peter Jackson, who committed to making The Hobbit at 48 frames a second instead of 24. He realized that 24 just wasn't enough for 3D. There's a lot of strobing, a lot of blurring, a lot of nasty artifacts at 24 frames. He realized that, as did I, 30 years ago with ShowScan. But Jim Cameron has also seen this, and he's done some really cool demos at 24, 48, and 60. He wants to make Avatar sequels at 60 frames. But even though they had a whole plan in place to open The Hobbit at 48 frames in 3D in 10,000 theaters, and 10,000 theaters were equipped and ready to run it, Warner Brothers pulled the plug after some weird negative blowback came at CinemaCon when they showed a clip from The Hobbit, and a lot of people said that the realism made them very uncomfortable. They didn't like it. It kind of broke the illusion of a fantasy movie, and so The Hobbit only got shown in about 400 theaters, and there's no telling what will happen now with the 2 more sequels of The Hobbit or with Avatar going forward, because the studio is inevitably going to say, the 24-frame release just made $1 billion, get over it. So Peter is my hero. Jim Cameron, I haven't spoken to Jim or Peter recently, but I hope to soon and find out what's really going on out there. My personal feeling about The Hobbit, how many of you guys saw The Hobbit? Did you see it in 3D at 48 frames? Oh yeah, well that's good. Well, I'll ask you later if we do a little Q&A what you thought of it, because I loved it. I thought it was really terrific. And it became much more participatory. It became like a game. It allowed all kinds of really dynamic camera moves that some people thought made them sick, but it doesn't make me sick because I do rides. So. But one of the things I think it fell short on was that Peter Jackson didn't really do anything outside of normal cinematic convention in terms of the structuring of the telling of the story that would embrace the potential of higher frame rates. I thought it was terrific. I personally believe that if you want to make a movie in a completely different medium and show it in a different way that's highly realistic, you've got to embrace a whole new cinematic language. And in order to do this, we need a bunch of things. We need high frame rate cameras that can record raw data, not compressed. We need high bandwidth SSD recorders. We need very fast storage so that we can record the data off the camera, retrieve it immediately, and see it on the screen, because you really have to see it at 120 frames to understand how the particular shot or performance is working as a filmmaker. And in compositing, I really like to see instant gratification as well. So we like to get off the compositor really fast and up on the screen. And in overall, we have a monster high bandwidth post-production pipeline. So a little bit later today, you're going to see some other presentations over in one of the other rooms in A210, I think. Timothy Huber, who is with Theory Consulting, has been helping us design our high bandwidth, high frame rate monster storage solution, and he was instrumental in talking Intel into giving us a bunch of storage just this week, and it's going to be arriving on my doorstep Monday, I hope. Ion fusion and ion generation is run by Steve, really developed, run, and operated by Steve Roberts, who spends a lot of time at our studio on his own nickel. He's my hero. He's going to be in the same facility at 2:30. They offer an amazing suite of tools that's everything from soup to nuts. It was the one process we could find that would allow us to actually look at our dailies at 120 frames a second in 3D, do a post-production pipeline, composite, update shots as we go along, and be able to see them readily. And it has a direct link to Avid Media Composer. So there's a complete systemic approach that I think is far superior to any solution I found out there. And I just wanted to reiterate that on Steve's shirt it says, "Ion, we suck less." I like that, and it's absolutely true. At 4 o'clock, you're going to hear Paul Lacombe from Unreal. He's one of our partners. His facilities are in our studio because we're pushing the envelope of virtual production, where we shoot on a very small stage with a lot of green screen with total camera movement fluidity. And we're headed toward a way of being able to make feature motion pictures where there are virtually no sets and no locations. It's kind of an extreme version of production because movies are costing too much. We're seeing average blockbuster tentpoles at the studios costing $300 million. I think it's crazy. I think it's dysfunctional. And I'd like to be able to do it for a lot less money and do it a lot better and do many more of them. And we're completely open at our studio, and there's no secrets about how we're doing it. And if you can learn anything from what we're doing, go with it. So I'm trying to get to something that is like a first-person experience that's happening in real time, and it's happening to you. And in order to tell a little bit about how I got to this, I need to show you a little bit of movie history. And I've put together a little film that's actually a work in progress. It's not finished. It's kind of a back burner project at my studio. You know, there's a long history of rectangular screens in darkened movie theaters, and celluloid film running through a camera or then running through a projector or being physically edited with scissors and tape and being put on the screen. It has a very long creative emergence, which developed the cinematic language of wide shots, master shots, close-ups, two shots, over-the-shoulder shots, inserts, and all the basic formulaic techniques of making a melodramatic story. But the whole thing has developed over our lifetimes about you're not in the movie, you're just watching something else happen. And so if the camera is over someone's shoulder looking at a close-up of someone else and they cut to an over-shoulder of the other person looking at someone else, nobody's talking to you. You're not in the movie, you're just watching the movie. You're a third-person voyeur watching things happen between and to other people. So I'm trying to explore a dynamic where what happens to you. It happens to them too, but I want you to be involved in it. So I'm going to show you a little bit of movie history. It's my first clip. And I'll show you a little bit of that history. So that's the first thing I'm going to run, and I hope this show is working, and it should happen now. Projected onto screens ever since their invention and development by Georges Méliès, the Lumière brothers, Edison, and others. Early movies were called the flickers because they were originally projected at about 18 frames per second with only a single-bladed shutter. The Lumière brothers invented the double-bladed shutter in order to reduce flicker, and you can see it here on my Powers Cameragraph projector being hand-cranked, as were the first movie cameras. In cameras, like my old standard Mitchell camera, the shutter closes in order for the film to be advanced to the next frame as well, and shutter angles are generally accepted to be about 180 degrees. Early limelight and arc illumination was very dim and screens were not very large. The blurring was an important element of helping merge a series of still photographs into a rapid succession of what we have known as moving pictures. My first experience with movies was a film for the 1964 New York World's Fair called To the Moon and Beyond. This film was shot in what was called Cinerama 360, a 10-perf 70mm image shot with fisheye lenses and projected onto a dome screen like a planetarium. It was here that I had my first experience with low brightness, blurring, strobing, and cross-reflectance across the dome screen. Motion-controlled miniature photography requires blur, as we found out on 2001: A Space Odyssey. Nevertheless, movie technology continued to develop, and with the advent of optical soundtracks, the industry standardized at 24 frames per second using double-bladed shutters right up to the present day for film projection. Exposure time for images has been almost always around a 48th of a second, resulting in substantial yet vitally important blur. One of the major innovations that emerged as a result of the competitive threat from television was Cinerama. This process used 3 cameras and 3 projectors, all operating in synchronization in order to produce an extremely wide panoramic image, which was presented on deeply curved 90-foot wide screens. The Cinerama process proved to be very cumbersome, with huge and heavy cameras, and it required a revised cinematic language that made it difficult to use conventional camera angles and editorial pacing. Cinerama later decided to embrace the 70mm Super Panavision format, and subsequently a number of films were produced in the process, including Lawrence of Arabia, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and many others. One exception was Mike Todd's Around the World in 80 Days, which was shot and projected in 70mm at 30 frames per second for the Todd-A-O process. The purpose was to reduce blurring and judder, which results when movies are presented onto giant screens. Even still, the Super Panavision cameras and excessive raw stock costs eventually resulted in a situation where films were shot in 35mm anamorphic widescreen and then blown up to 70mm for giant screen presentation. It is important to know that throughout the recent history of movie projection onto screens, there has been a brightness limitation of about 15 foot-lamberts due to the double shuttering that causes flicker to be objectionable at higher brightness. Multiplex screens have been the dominant yet smallest movie screens, while the specialty process of IMAX has offered a giant screen experience that is mostly blow-ups of 35mm movies. Now that our industry is transitioning to digital projection without shutters, we can project at any screen brightness, possibly far brighter than 15 foot-lamberts. In the days of ShowScan, which photographed and projected films at 60 frames per second using a single shutter closure, we regularly used double industry standards of brightness, projecting at 30 foot-lamberts onto giant screens. At this time, we're also reconsidering the 24 frame per second rate, since it appears to be inadequate for 3D and fast-action films. We are also reconsidering brightness issues, since the filtration and glasses associated with 3D are tremendously reducing perceived brightness, often showing expensive blockbuster movies at less than 4 foot-lamberts. Experiments are now underway at my studio to explore ultra-high frame rates of 120 frames per second in 3D and at very high brightness. At the same time, we will be trying all frame rates including 24, 30, 48, 60, and 120 frames per second, and at varying brightnesses. Stewart Film Screen has generously fabricated a high-gain torus-type screen that we're setting up here for testing. The design of the screen is intended to use a very high gain of 3, being a silver surface on vinyl, and the screen is hemispherically curved in order to focus the projected light directly toward viewers, rather than allowing stray light to bounce to the walls and ceiling of the theater. The curvature of the screen and the rays of light from the projector are computer designed to optimize a very wide viewing angle while disallowing poor seat locations. In order to achieve the hemispherical screen shape, a vacuum is drawn inside an enclosure behind the screen, and a sensor behind the screen automatically controls a vacuum fan, keeping the screen at exactly the right curvature. When the fan is turned on, the screen assumes the correct reflective shape.
The projector is located at the computer-designed location, and in this case, we are using dual digital projectors in order to experiment with very bright projection at a rate of 120 frames per eye for 3D. Historically, movie screens have been white, or what is called unity gain. This has allowed viewing of the image from extremely off-angle to the surface of the screen, but has allowed tremendous light loss to the ceiling, walls, and floor of the theater. Torus screens are not new and were once used by major theater chains to offer an improved viewing situation for their audiences. There are issues with Torus screens, one of which is the inability to hide speakers behind the screen since it cannot be perforated. It may be possible to solve this problem with advanced holographic sound systems, which we intend to experiment with soon in this laboratory. Torus screens may be one way to recover the light loss through filtration and glasses for 3D, and this technology may offer new opportunities to explore extremely bright as well as extremely wide viewing experiences that are far superior to Cinerama, IMAX, or other existing formats.
So you can see that our studio, which is in the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts, is a kind of a movie laboratory. We operate completely autonomously from the normal industry, and I'm exploring this whole way of making movies, experimenting with how to make a movie, experimenting with frame rates, 3D, angles of view, blah, 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 and actually setting up a screening facility on the stage so that we can look at what we're shooting while we're shooting, or at least in a few minutes after we shoot something. And this whole thing started with me a long, long time ago on 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was a major turning point in my life to work with Stanley Kubrick. It was shot in 70mm Super Panavision. It was branded Cinerama, and it was shown in the original Cinerama theaters that all had these very deeply curved, 90-foot wide screens. And Stanley wanted the audience to feel like they were in the movie too. He wanted to get past cinematic conventions. He talked to me about it quite a lot. And he wanted the audience to feel like they were going into space. And so he avoided normal shots like over-the-shoulder shots of Keir Delay going through the Stargate, or reverse shot on Keir Delay reacting to the Stargate. He just let the Stargate run so that you could be in the Stargate. And there's sequences in 2001 that run 17 minutes long with absolutely no dialogue and no acting and no story. It's a purely experiential movie, and that's one of the reasons it became known as the ultimate trip. And it's one of the reasons it stands out in movie history as one of the most unique and special movies of all time. It's come to my attention recently that Elon Musk has a screening room called the Kubrick Screening Room. That's terrific. I've been to Tom Hanks's office. He has a bathroom that's called the Zero Gravity Toilet. So stuff is still happening. 2001 is still strangely alive and well. It really became almost like a drug to me, of the whole idea of a giant screen experience, and I became very disappointed subsequent to that because Cinerama went away, 70mm went away. The multiplex era began, which was to take giant theaters and carve them up into a multiplex. And there was a business model which was all about filling seats rather than creating spectacle or providing any kind of immersive or showmanship in the theaters. And one of the things I found just recently, because I was looking at a recently issued box set of How the West Was Won, which was one of the best giant screen dramatic movies made prior to 2001. Kubrick joked about it. He said, well, I got to make How the Universe Was Won, because it was falling on the heels of one of these epic movies. And I found this little thing called the Cinerama Adventure, made by Dave Strohmeyer, which is a fantastic and very interesting documentary about the history of Cinerama. And if anybody of you are interested in the history of movies and how that came about, you can find this in the box set. So in the context of high frame rates and things like The Hobbit and Avatar with Jim Cameron and Peter Jackson, I feel like the reason I want to bring this up is that history is repeating itself. All of the issues related to changing the medium and not changing what you do with it is coming into consciousness right now. And I'm sure Peter Jackson is starting to realize that if he wants 48 frames or even 60 to be embraced by the public, he's got to actually make the movie a different way. Jim Cameron, with the Avatar, I think Avatar is much more appropriate to high frame rates and giant screens because it's a very trippy kind of concept of, you know, flying around, things like that, which is more like a ride than a historical melodrama. So what I'm working on is a kind of a lone wolf project of my own, because I do write, I do produce, I direct, I shoot, I geek, I do inventions, and I try to raise money for what I'm trying to do. And so everybody else is going to have to understand that if they want to really be part of the future of entertainment and recognize that games and NVIDIA-driven high-speed graphics accelerators are actually a larger business than the movie business, that there's some message, some lesson to be learned about what people really want. People want to be involved. They want to be there. They want to participate. Now, in what I'm doing, you don't get to control it. You don't get a joystick. But believe me, you're going to feel like you're inside of it. So I'm going to show you another little clip about the history of Cinerama. I took this 2-hour documentary that Dave made and cut it down to 5 minutes. So it's very chopped up, but it'll tell you the story of how it affected the directors, how it affected the actors, and how it affected the studios, and why it didn't work as a business.
The directors of Cinerama Pictures were under orders to really make attempts to show off the process.
I remember that it was tremendously exciting and frightening, but I mean, the wonderful thing about Cinerama was the fact that you really felt enveloped by it.
Each of the directors had problems with the format. They were not used to it. It was different. The size of the cameras, the complexity of them, the fact that there were 3 pieces of film going at the same time bothered all of them, and they were certainly not used to composing the action to the camera's problems rather than to what they saw as the flow of the picture.
You know, when you're watching an Indian attack and there's a point of view shot, you're riding with those Indians as they're making their charge, and then the camera rises up. It's very exciting, and that's just one shot of many.
The camera is this big, and when you speak to your fellow actor, you can't. You'll only hear his lines. You have to look straight into the camera like a third in, and you pretend that that's whoever you're supposed to be looking at. That was very difficult. It was very hard because your co-star is way over in the mountains saying the lines, and you're looking at him here.
Why, for you, childbearing had come as easy as rolling off a log.
Well, I think I'd rather roll off a log, Mr. Morgan.
So when Mad World came out, which was a movie that was heavily advertised as being in Cinerama, it was actually the first single-lens Cinerama movie. And 2001 and the later pictures that everybody thought were in Cinerama were really in this single-lens process, which allowed them to be much more fluid and essentially make the films in a somewhat more cinematic way. They were projected on a curved screen, so I think they lost something when they gave up the 3-projector system, but they gained a lot of flexibility and the ability to make the pictures, and I think probably the later pictures are better because of it.
And now, your journey is just beginning.
I think it's important to note that even though Cinerama is no longer with us today, Cinerama is there in the kinds of films we see. Cinerama created a widescreen revolution, and we're still looking at widescreen films. Every film that's shown on American screens today is in some ways indebted to the kind of transformation of motion picture experience that Cinerama engineered.
So Cinerama came out when I was a kid, and there were a number of other processes that were all coming out around the same time. And I won't list them all, but they were all giant screen processes like Tadeo and D150 and blah, blah, blah. but they were all reactions against the fear of the movie industry that television was going to take away their business. Now the movie business has become the television business, and 75% of the box office 75% of the total revenues on any movie comes from electronic digital media use of that content. So they're very attuned to the idea of making movies that are completely compatible with these conventional outlets. And we've got this crazy business model to where you're judged entirely by how many $1 million you make in the first weekend. And it's not about art, it's not about passion, it's not about your love of movies or exploring cinema or anything. It's about making money with tentpole blockbuster sequels. And that's just not my cup of tea. So I'm coming at it from a different way. I became convinced by working on 2001 that working in giant screens was definitely what I wanted to do. I loved it. I wanted to pursue that, and I found that I had to do that elsewhere. So I did a lot of theme park shows and World's Fairs and expos in order to make some money. But nevertheless, throughout all my years in the movie business working on films, I was always trying to find ways, even within the limits of the conventional movie industry, to create moments in movies where the story stops and it just hopefully takes your breath away. It's epic, it's spectacular, it's immersive in some way, even though it's still just 35mm film and it's on a small rectangular screen in a normal cinema. And so I'm just going to show you a few clips from films I've worked on, because I want you to know that in the back of my mind, I felt that they could be much better than they were and much more spectacular than they were. And I'm trying still to this day to get to this whole new opening of cinema to this kind of hyper-real process. So these movies were conventional storytelling, but one of the stepping stones in my career was Brainstorm, because I did develop the show scan process, which was highly immersive. It was 60 frames per second, 70mm. This was 35 years ago. And I was going to make this movie Brainstorm in the process. And the bottom line was that Hollywood was absolutely unwilling to do it because it required a lot of extra print costs, it required special projectors, theater conversions, and it just wasn't going to happen. And so I had to even make Brainstorm, my own movie, conventionally. But so when you see clips of Brainstorm, imagine what they would be like if they were on a giant screen at 120 frames a second. And you'll see what was on my mind when I was doing these things, because I'm still on the same track. I'll just show you some clips.
moments, you will have an experience which will seem completely real.
It's a superconducting chip. Keep it quiet.
I think you're moving too fast. God, that's remarkable. A true, one-of-a-kind scientific breakthrough.
We're interested in tapping into higher brain function.
We're working on that, too.
Shut up, Michael.
Every filmmaker wants to put exciting action on the screen, but at 24 frames a second, just when you want the most excitement is when you get the worst blur. So, thanks. I only showed those things for a reason, and it just, if you can imagine that you were all here and the screen was as big as the width of this room and four times as high, that's kind of what Cinerama was. That's what IMAX tries to be, and what we're trying to do is going to be substantially more powerful than that. I'm very proud of all the films I've worked on. I'm proud of having a chance to work with some really great directors. And now we're at this really cool time that's being enabled by high-speed digital image processing and fast bandwidth equipment. And so it's offering a completely new path that doesn't have the boundaries built into it that I had in the days I was trying to do show scan. We don't need expensive 65 millimeter, 150-pound cameras. We don't need expensive 70 millimeter film stock. We can shoot at any frame rate we want. There's cameras off the shelf that'll go 1,500 frames a second if you want it. The 3D rigs are very lightweight. All the alignment problems are solvable. There's a lot of really terrific companies providing cool 3D production equipment. We're presently shooting our film with a 3-reality TS5 rig with dual Canon C500 cameras at 4K at 120 frames a second. Digital post-production is allowing us to do all kinds of amazing things, and Steve Roberts at ION is going to do a presentation in a little while to tell you what he's doing for everybody, and not just for us. And so this is far superior to anything I experienced in my film days. And we also have digital projectors, which don't have those problems of shutters, light loss, dimness, strobing, blurring. We can have, all projectors that you're seeing today, including this one right here, is running at 144 frames a second, whether you use it or not. So there's no added cost, really, to projecting films at high frame rates. It's just a little change to the server and a few more bytes of data. I just received a patent on an unusual aspect of movie production about high frame rates. And I came up with this idea about 3 years ago. I applied for a patent, and we did an experiment on this concept I developed and applied for a patent on, which was shooting at 120 frames a second with a 360-degree shutter, which means that the shutter basically never closed. That the next frame picks up where the previous frame left off. It never closed. It never missed any of the action. You capture 100% of what happens in front of the camera. And if you have 120 frames in 2D or 3D, you can show it at 120 frames, you can delete every other frame and get 60, or you can combine 3 frames and delete 2 frames in sequence and get back to 24 and recover the blur that you need for 24 frame. 24 frame movies depend on blur. They look terrible without blur. And the computer graphics industry that's making the movies that you see is spending most of its, or not most, maybe I shouldn't exaggerate, a lot of render time creating unnecessary blur just to make a dysfunctional medium seem acceptable. What we're finding is working at 120 frames a second, we don't need any blur, we don't like blur, we like our frames to be sharp, your eye can follow everything, all the information is there. And so in the highest action scenes, whether they're special effects or live action, everything is captured. But this problem that Peter Jackson has been experiencing and Warner's have been experiencing about some scenes or moments in movies feeling somehow uncomfortable because they're too real, like a close-up of a beautiful actress or something, maybe it needs to be at 24 frames. Or maybe you want to make a movie that looks like it's 24 frames, but when something blows up, the blow-up explosion is 120 frames or 60 or 48 or anywhere. And so I invented this idea that you could actually dynamically change the frame rate on any pixel, any object, any person, any shot, any scene, any sequence, dynamically through the course of a movie, just like color grading or color timing or editing or anything else. And so I'm going to show you a brief clip about this thing we call ShowScan Digital, for which we just received a patent a couple of days ago.
I don't believe that any higher frame rate is really a magic bullet for making better movies. But I do believe that allowing the director to dynamically change frame rate through a movie on a shot-by-shot or object-by-object basis is as important as being able to change the color, change the grading, change the interaxial spacing for a 3D movie, or any of the other variables that we're all used to having in the movie business. I think frame rates should be variable. The whole world has adapted to seeing 24 frames per second in a movie theater using double-bladed shutters and mechanical projectors, while television has been at 60 frames per second in the US and 50 frames per second in Europe, both interlaced. There could be substantial resistance if movies begin looking like television. And there could be tremendous benefits if we could vary frame rates dynamically over time. Every filmmaker wants to put exciting action on the screen, but at 24 frames per second, just when you want the most action is when you get the worst blur. When you shoot a movie at 24 frames, half the time the shutter is open and half the time the shutter is closed because the film has got to be moved to the next frame mechanically. So half the action's not recorded because the shutter is closed. Having shot our original images at 120 with a 360 shutter, we can reconnect 3 adjacent frames to recover a continuous blur and delete the next 2 frames, resulting in a 24-frame movie as though it were shot with a 216-degree shutter. We shot identical takes at both 120 with a 360 shutter and also at the standard of 24 frames with a 180 shutter. When the 120 material is converted to 24, it is identical to the material shot at 24 in this side-by-side image. From the original, we can derive 60 frames by simply deleting every other frame. And keep in mind that the exposure of 1/120th of a second at a 360 shutter is identical to the exposure shooting at 60 frames per second with a 180-degree shutter. The clarity of the 60-frame version is strikingly less blurred and can deliver fast action that is far superior to 24, but may not be appropriate for some dramatic scenes. The most important aspect of shooting at 120 with a 360 shutter is that you now have the ability to embed high frame rates within lower frame rates. You can dynamically alter the frame rate on any pixel, any object, any character, any action to be at 24, 30, 48, 60, or 120 frames per second as you desire. This can automatically be accomplished via what we call frame-integrated motion analysis, allowing the filmmaker to easily flag picture elements that are moving so fast that they blur objectionably and ramp these parts up to any desirable frame rate while preserving the world standard movie texture of 24 frames per second as appropriate.
This performer in white will be running at 24 frames per second. And this performer in black will be running at 60 frames a second. All of this photography will be produced at 120 frames per second. to give us as much motion data as we need.
It requires setting up a digital cinema package that's actually running at 120 frames a second, which we don't have here today.
It's important to know that digital projectors do not have shutters at all, and they can project at very, very high frame rates. Many thanks to ShowScan Digital and Christie Digital for allowing me to do these experiments to show that you can have any frame rate anywhere you want in your movie at any time. This is 24 frames per second.
So you see a lot of blurring there.
This is 60.
Now it's not really 60 because it's been interpolated by this projector. I've been doing some demos at trade shows with Christie where we show a 24, 60, and 120 of the same material, and it's really strikingly different. But you need a very, very large screen to notice the difference. So one of the things that, it's weird that even with the Society of Motion Picture Television Engineers, I see people say, well, 60 frames is all you need. And I say, well, all you need for what? And my experience having going all the way back to projecting onto dome screens where suddenly 24 frames that might only go across a 30-degree field of view, that same 24 frames might be going across a 180-degree field of view, which means that the frame-to-frame angular displacement is increasing and your brain can't hook it together. So there is a relationship between field of view and frame rate that was studied way back in the 50s when Mike Todd did Around the World in 80 Days at 30 frames. People have certainly been looking at this, but it's never been feasible until today with digital technology. And one of the other ideas that I'm working on is by shooting at 120 frames digitally, which is very, very easy. Almost every camera, the Alexa, the Red, Epic, the Canon cameras, almost all cameras can go 120 frames a second effortlessly. It doesn't make any more noise. It just creates a little more data. It's not a problem, and it offers the opportunity to basically oversample your movie so that as it becomes in subsequent releases, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you can upgrade the movie because you got a tremendous amount of recorded data. And if you spent $200, $300 million on production value, you really owe it to yourself to record everything you paid for. And so that's one of my other rags about that. A lot of it comes down to money. My experience, as I was just saying, is that when you make a movie, you have to have a director, you have to have actors, you have to have a stage, you have to have a studio, you have to have wardrobe, makeup, props, everything. You always have to have those kind of things. But you don't necessarily have to go on location, and you don't even necessarily need sets. Because now that we're doing more and more of set extensions and green screens, and the proportion of green screens per movie is increasing dramatically every day, and that's all being enabled by green screen photography, graphics engines, and one of my pet projects that I've been working on with Paul Lacombe for many, many years now is virtual sets, where the entire environment for the movie is pre-produced before you shoot. So you bring actors onto an empty stage, you give them their props, you say, well, this is the set that you're in, this is the location you're in. You can see yourself composited into it now, not in post. You can see it now, photorealistically. And with Ion Fusion, I'm going through a complete head trip because the process that's been enabled by Steve Roberts' company is to be able to take simple still photographs, put them into the computer, turn them into 3D, move the camera around, and be done in a matter of minutes. And so we're doing scenes in this Ufotog film that use that technique as a virtual set technology. And I'm just blown away. All my paradigms about how much movies should cost, how long it should take, and actually how many setups a day we can hypothetically shoot is something we're experimenting with right now. So we got a whole bunch of things going on simultaneously, which requires theater lobbies like this and hemispherical theaters that have a completely different shape to the screen, a different configuration of the seating, brighter projection, higher frame rates, some modification to servers. There's nothing here that can't be done today with existing off-the-shelf stuff, knowing that in a year, 2 or 3, all the projector companies, whether it's Christie or Barco or JVC or everybody else, are coming out with laser projectors that can double the amount of light and increase the color gamut. And so there's all kinds of improvements going on. But I don't see a lot of improvements going on in the way people make movies. So I'd like to make something that's more like 2001. I have people come up to me almost all the time, particularly at a situation like this, say, I became an astronomer because when I was 9 years old I saw 2001, or whatever. Happens all the time. And I think that for me to be satisfied as a filmmaker, I want to make movies that are relevant, important, meaningful, rich in information, and not some popcorn summer blockbuster about Spider-Man or Batman or anything else. I want to make a different kind of movie, and there's very little room for it. So my business plans right now are about making a new enterprise, which is production, distribution, and exhibition in a whole new chain of theaters, shooting in a whole new way, in a whole new process. And we're looking for investors. And we may even come to this very town and do some demonstrations, because this is the town where people embrace high technology and high bandwidth and high throughput and know how much better it gets every year. You know, we got this paradigm right now where the studios have commoditized visual effects. Visual effects are the movies. Visual effects have subsumed sets, props, locations, characters, wardrobe, makeup, everything is now visual effects, and they still want to tamp it down and say, well, that's just visual effects. We're going to contract it out to Taiwan or Singapore or New Zealand or wherever. And so a lot of effects studios are going bankrupt because they're not allowed to participate in the profits of the movies that they make. So I'd like to change that as well. We're going to create a movie model where everybody who works on the movie gets to participate in the back end. So let me see. One of the other components of the whole equation is that the multiplex theater, I think, is now being subsumed by all the iPads in this room, because you can have any movie, anytime, anywhere. You can download it, stream it, etc. And so all the convenience that's been offered by multiplexes of being able to get different movies to watch at different times of the day has actually been subsumed by high technology. And I think that the life of the multiplex theater is going to be short. And I think the next step, if we want people to go to theaters and we want people to see spectacular immersive experiences, we have to provide something that is so big, so spectacular, so high frame rate, so bright, so high impact that you can't possibly see it on an iPad or a computer or a home TV or anything else. You've got to create something. So that's kind of one of the agendas that I'm on. I had a lot to do with IMAX, so I became kind of fearless about the idea of starting a company from scratch. I helped take IMAX public and brought it from this little company that was making documentary films in science museums into the mainstream, and that's proven that the audience really wants a more spectacular giant screen experience. IMAX is having a lot of success and is growing pretty fast, but I think we can do much better, and what we're doing right now I think is going to be better than Cinerama, better than IMAX, better than anything you've ever seen in terms of image quality and immersiveness on the screen. And I'm exploring as a director how to write the story for that, how to direct the story for that, how to edit the story for that, so that what you get is a whole new animal. So I'm going to show you a little bit, I promised to show you a little bit behind the scenes on what we're doing at our studio. We do have this Taurus screen. There's no cross reflectance. It's very bright, very high contrast. We regularly see film at about 35 or more foot Lamberts after polarization in 3D. It's unheard of. That's 10 times the brightness of 3D movies in regular theaters. Stewart Film Screen built the screen for me. Christie Digital has provided the projectors. Cameras have been provided by Canon. And a whole bunch of people like Nvidia, Intel, Paul's company, Unreal, Ion, and many other companies have been helping us get to this new plateau. And we're trying to do something that seems to be almost impossible because of the business nature of the way the movie business is structured, which I don't care for very much. Anyway, the movie that we're working on is only going to be about 10 minutes long. It's a demo film that's just going to show you what it's like, because I can talk till I'm blue in the face. I can't show it to you here. You got to come to my screening room. Hopefully we're going to set up some more facilities to run this for you so you can see it on a giant screen. You can see what high frames are like. You can see what it's like to have a movie directed to where a performer is talking to you. It's going to be like your favorite actor or actress is a foot in front of your face talking to you. That's going to be breathtaking and a completely different paradigm shift of what a movie experience can be. So you see little bits of pieces of that here. I can't show you very much. This is just a behind-the-scenes cut that I just did 2 nights ago, and it'll tell you a little bit about what's going on at Trumbull Studios. And one of the reasons I'm going to show it to you is that it's called UFOTOG, which is for UFO photography, which is actually a real project that I've been working on for 15 years. I believe it's possible to photograph real UFOs. If they're out there, I'm going to photograph them. So this is a fictional story based on that idea, and a lot of the props and things that you'll see in this film are real telescopes and real tracking systems and real optics and real computers and real image processors that are being used as props in this fictional movie. And if I can do it before I croak, I'm going to photograph UFOs for you to see.
Here at Trumbull Studios, we're shooting a demonstration film called UFOTOG.
And action.
I was the lead nuke engineer on the SSN-23 Jimmy Carter.
It is being produced at 120 frames per second in 4K 3D, and we're using dual Canon C500 cameras mounted on a Reality TS5 3D rig, recording to codex recorders. Our studio is a laboratory where we can experiment, collaborate with world-class talents, and explore a new kind of immersive experience that goes beyond any film process ever known.
There are spooks after me, because I'm the only guy who's figured out how to get it.
Focus on that. Lock off. Oh,
While the movie screen is two-dimensional, we're using this hyper-cinema to make the audience believe that it is completely real.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated.
Our studio is on a farm and includes donkeys, goats, and chickens. Scenes in UFOTOG involve the lead character photographing himself to record an extraordinary UFO event that he has set in motion.
It worked.
This is Stephen Roberts, creator of ion, ion fusion, and ion generation. These are powerful tools that enable us to work at high frame rates in 3D and perform amazing composites that link directly into Avid Media Composer. Our editor, Jeff Krebs, is working with us to explore what I call first-person cinema, allowing viewers to feel that they are inside the movie. Our creative process fully embraces what I call organic effects, using miniatures, motion control, streak photography, liquid tank effects, and a careful blend of computer graphics.
It's been released to us, so we told us.
Here, Don Canfield and Miles Lewis are using Cooper motion control software on a Genuflex boom system supplied by Joe Lewis's company, General Lift. All photography is being done exclusively with Canon cameras and lenses. Here, pico projectors are being used as part of a rotational scanner system to create UFOs that seem to be made of pure light. And then the next round is going to be higher resolution. We'll go from a 4K camera to a 6K or an 8K camera. And we'll go from a 2K projector to a 4K projector to a 6K projector. This whole thing will become progressively more intensely real, even more than it is right now.
Thank you. I don't know what our timing is here. I'm going to try to wrap this up. And we're going to be finishing this film over the next 2 or 3 months and taking it to an extremely high level of finish. With we're cutting in Avid Media Composer. We're using ion generation, and ion links directly to Avid, so that the whole post-production workflow is very stable and every shot can be updated. I can introduce new effects cuts and completely update the cut as we go forward. So we think we're going to have a pretty spectacular demo pretty shortly, and then we're going to be showing this to investors and partners and see how we can actually set up a pretty radical new company that will produce, distribute, and exhibit movies in this medium, because I don't think it's going to fit inside regular theaters. And if anybody's here from SpaceX or Tesla or Virgin Galactic or whatever, this is the way you should make your movies. So give us a call. I'm just going to take another couple of minutes and show you one short film because it's what this whole project Ufotog is about. It's a name of a real spacecraft, excuse me. Kepler, which you all know as a GPU, is a real spacecraft in orbit right now named after a famous astronomer who discovered planets orbiting. And Kepler has now been finding that there are billions, count them, billions of habitable planets in habitable zones around stars in our own galaxy, and there are tens of millions of galaxies. So I think that one of the things that I hope will happen in my lifetime, in your lifetime, is that we're going to have another revolution. When Copernicus figured out that we weren't the center of the universe, we're going to find out that we're not the center of life in the universe either. And that's going to be a big shock to the Pope, but I've been to the Vatican Observatory. I know they can handle it. And I'm going to show you this quick little thing and end my presentation. And this is about the real Ufotog project.
Our visible universe contains over 125 billion galaxies, and our galaxy contains over 500 billion stars. Most of these stars have planets, and many of these planets will be found in habitable zones. I believe we are at the threshold of finding life throughout the universe and in huge numbers. Major motion pictures have dealt with the subject of UFOs and aliens, but always as dramatized fiction, thus stripping the subject of objective clarity and trivializing and marginalizing real phenomena as science fiction or fantasy.
I merely tell you that the future of your planet is at stake.
I've seen photos and videos and movies of UFOs all my life. The problem I have with these is that there is never any valid scientific data to conclude if they're real, fake, or just natural phenomena that's been misinterpreted. I've done a lot of special effects depicting UFOs and alien contact, but I've never seen a UFO myself. I did come across this sighting recently and thought it was quite compelling, but it's so easy to make a hoax, and in fact, I think most sightings these days are fraudulent. This one looked convincing at first, but I know it's a fake because I made it myself. This is just a wok, a dessert mold, a stovetop heat diffuser, and 3 tea strainers bolted and hot glued together in about an hour. Cool, I've started a project to scientifically photograph UFOs using state-of-the-art technology.
This is a 4-time Academy Award winner Mike Sorensen in his machine shop.
We're going to be using high-definition digital cameras, infrared cameras, ultraviolet, night vision, spectrographs, telephoto lenses, electromagnetic and gravitation phased array sensors, radio frequency spectrum analyzers, and subject our data to rigorous scientific analysis. The all-sky camera will detect moving objects in the sky and filter out known phenomena such as clouds, birds, aircraft, and astronomical objects. UFOTOG technology is being designed and fabricated specifically for finding UFOs. In order to capture events that may be extremely brief and in any number of difficult locations, we've been equipping this ex-military Humvee with all the gear so that we can stop anywhere and be up and running in minutes. This is just the first phase of making a feature film and a television series depicting the excitement and drama of looking for the real thing.
We're going to have a little Q&A now, and you guys have to tell me whether I'm crazy or not.
This sequence shows the first night of testing the UFOTOG system aboard the Humvee on location. There's a great deal of work to be done to optimize our ability to look for transient anomalies in the sky, both day and night, at almost any location. As we calibrate the systems, we will begin to gather useful data on object size, distance, altitude, trajectory, and velocity. The system will be able to lock on and follow fast and non-ballistic motions, including aircraft, satellites, and objects that are not visible to the naked eye. It's really weird. Not going anywhere. In addition, we will begin scientific data analysis to quantify the exact wavelengths and spectra of light emitted by known and unknown objects. The UFOTOG science team will work in parallel with the production crew to produce a feature film, a television series, and 24/7 online real-time access to multiple field teams around the world. UFOTOG is unique. Everything you see will be true and supported by scientific evidence. There will be no fictionalized melodrama. Going into the trees. The stars are the real sky and amazing real phenomena recorded for the first time. The drama is real people on a quest to understand the most profound events that will affect our understanding of man's place in a universe filled with life.
We're seeing strange lights in the sky.
They were too fast to be an airplane.
They seem to flip and flash in the sun just like a mirror.
Okay. If we have time for Q&A, I'd be happy to do it. Otherwise, I'm happy to split. Greg?
Doug, if you have time, we do have time for some questions. I would ask that you use the microphone that's over there to make
Can we
it
get
easy
house
to hear.
lights up?
Yes.
Hi, Doug. Just wondering, with regards to the editing, did you discard the time codes altogether and just use frame indexing, or?
Did we discard what?
You know, for editing the 120 frame per second project, show scan, did you edit on the Avid Media Composer in 60, or?
We've been trying various ways. We've been cutting some stuff at 24, some at 30, and some at 60. We do not try to cut at 120, but that would be really super if we could do that. So we're kind of on a very steep learning curve, working with everybody who's in the post business to help us get there.
You have a question?
Hi, Tracy and Richard Jurisic says hi.
Hi.
DARPA's looking at a project to try to find the 50,000 pieces of debris up there. So your mechanical system would be excellent at helping to identify the over 50,000 pieces of space junk, and they're trying to track it. So basically what you would do is take about 100 of yours and mechanically point them to sections of the sky and be able to track the objects and help DARPA identify which ones are problematic and which ones need to be cleaned up.
Right. Well, my personal belief from everything that I've heard from reputable people who are in the UFO realm, one of them is Jacques Vallée. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. He actually lives here in San Francisco, works in Silicon Valley as a high-tech investment advisor. And he's written many, many books about the whole UFO story. And I didn't find out until many years after the fact that he was actually the prototype for the character played by Francois Truffaut in Close Encounters. He is the real French UFO guy. And that Spielberg had read Jacques Vallée's books. And Jacques Vallée's books are based upon reputable stories. And so you have to go back and say, oh my God, is anything in Close Encounters real or based on real stories? Is it not entirely fictional? Blah, blah, blah. It's really interesting. So I believe that there's every indication that UFOs are not flying spacecraft, really. They're like the end of a wormhole. They can appear and disappear and transform from a completely energetic state to a physical state and back again in the wink of an eye. They come and go with impunity. They don't have to be tracked by NORAD or anybody else because they're not out there. They just show up here and they go away. It's weird, but that's one of the things we're trying to show in this film, just to get people to recognize that it's not like our 50s idea of a UFO, you know, being a physical object. They are sometimes, but they may not be most of the time. You can take it for what it's worth.
Hi. Excuse me. Over there, to your right.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Could you give us maybe your thoughts on using stereo and how much we could maybe enhance the stereo experience? Specifically, let's say in a very near future we don't have glasses anymore. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts about what we would want to do with the camera?
Yeah, it would be really ideal if we could, if someone would invent a really cool, what we call an auto stereoscopic system that doesn't require glasses. We're not there yet. No one has proposed a really good one yet. I don't like wearing glasses myself. And we sometimes in our screening room, we're looking at stuff at 120 frames a second in 3D, and then we'll turn off one of the eyes and take the glasses off and just look at it 120 frames in 2D. And it's still enormously striking. So I think the jury is out on that for me. Nevertheless, one of the things that we're doing, which is utterly unheard of in the movie industry, is that in the normal movie industry, if you are shooting a movie, you may have a wide shot with a fairly wide lens. But if you go to a close-up or a medium shot, you may change the focal length of the lens to reduce the depth of field and go to a close-up. And so you're constantly changing the angle of view of the camera, but the angle of view of the projection remains constant. This doesn't work. What they learned in Cinerama, if they wanted to keep the audience involved in a sense of spatial orientation in the movie, they had to stay with one lens all the time. Even if it was a close-up or a two-shot, stick with that lens because that's a natural field of view. And so once you perfect the stereo space, which is natural to a certain field of view, which in my ideal world is about 90 degrees, we use the same lens. So what I did was I designed the screen in my theater. I go to the center average seat in the theater. I look at it with a certain lens. I say, well, that's the lens I need to shoot with if I want people to see that field of view. So the UFOTOG film we're shooting, everything is shot with one lens. Two, actually, but same focal length. And we're finding that even though we can cut and move and do dolly shots and everything, if we stick with that lens, the sense of immersion and three-dimensionality remains absolutely constant, easy to watch, not jarring to your eyes, and not unreal like you would get with a narrow telephoto lens in a close-up. So I'm just exploring all kinds of ways that I think 3D can be at its best, and we're getting no negative artifacts of 3D at 120 frames. It's completely amazing and immersive. And when you see all these shots strung together, you feel like you're there. You feel like you're in the movie. And that's, for me, it's opening up a whole new territory that's like discovering a new continent of opportunity of making a whole new kind of movie in a whole new way. And that's really fun. That's an adventure. That's exciting. It's like climbing a mountain or diving in the ocean or whatever. So just exploring what you can do and not being stuck with old 1950s or 1930s conventions of what it is to shoot a movie and how to edit a movie. That's what interests me. So you'll see for yourself when we get this thing done. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question. From the days of early cave paintings to paintings that were very flat to the time that all the rules of the vanishing point and all these monocular cues came into making paintings more realistic, photorealism, moving pictures, on and on. Why is it, what is your explanation as to why there's been a rather underwhelming response to stereoscopics? Here, at least in this country, I know in China and in Europe things are going a little better, but why here sort of a underwhelming response?
Well, I would disagree. I don't think it's an underwhelming response. I think one of the most interesting examples of the forefront of movie production and exhibition is Avatar. It's probably the geekiest, most high technology, deconstructed movie production process ever attempted, where it's in virtual space, it's all motion capture, it's all post-production effects, post-directing. Jim is directing after the fact, blah, blah, blah. But it's the largest grossing movie in history. It's probably broken past $2 billion already. And most movies today are still being made in 3D. I just think that if you want to make a movie, the first thing you have to recognize that if you're going to take a story from a screenwriter about some subject, you don't just say, well, let's make it in 3D because 3D movies make 25% more in the box office. That's not the reason. That's not a valid reason. That's not the right criteria. You should make it in 3D if you want the audience to feel involved, if you want your movie to come alive. This is one of the reasons I think that animated films are so successful in 3D, because 3D makes cartoons look three-dimensional. It goes from 2D flat and cell animation to 3D volumetric animation, and it looks great, and it's a hugely profitable business. So I wouldn't say 3D is dead, but I think 3D at 24 frames has so many negative technical artifacts that can be corrected. It could take on a whole new life if we can solve these problems. And you can't solve the problems if the studios are so recalcitrant about it, or the exhibitors are so unable to understand even what it means to shoot in 3D or exhibit in 3D. I'm trying to push the frontier of what it is. I see 3D every day that's better than any 3D I've ever seen. It's comfortable. Everybody comes to our screening room and says, wow, that's amazing. I never saw anything like that. It doesn't give me eye fatigue. It doesn't make me tired. It doesn't give me eye strain. And I say, well, let's go there. Let's make a business out of that. And so one of the things from a business standpoint is recognizing that I can't make a movie that satisfies everybody. If my movie makes no sense on television, fine. If my movie makes no sense on a regular flat two-dimensional screen, it doesn't matter to me. I can't do what I want to do without actually facing the fact that if I can just get a movie in this process on a screen and get people to pay to go see it, that could build a new industry. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. It has to carry its own weight. We're doing this demonstration film to prove to everybody that, holy moly, there is some completely unexpected new opportunity that everybody could use. If you want to do action sports or mountain climbing or underwater diving or spelunking or space movies about the International Space Station or science fiction movies or adventures or fantasy or whatever, it just allows a whole new look at what those are and what the experience can be in a theater. And I think people are going to have to decide once, I'm going to just do what I can do, which is kind of explore the new frontier, and then say, okay, come on. I can't carry this myself. I'm just going to show you what it can be, and you decide if you want to make your movie that way. But I do think, and I stress, it's a completely different cinematic language, and it's a different animal. So it means if you're a writer, you have to write differently. If you're a director, you have to direct differently. If you're an actor, you act differently. If you're an editor, you edit differently. That scares a lot of people because they say, oh, I've got a lifetime career invested in knowing to do what I do. But, we made the transition from moviolas and celluloid film to digital pretty well. It went well. And so I think we can make this transition as well. And you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater either. There's Joe Lewis there, who's the epicenter of an almost dead art of motion control and motors and slit scan and physical photography techniques, which I love much better than computer graphics in many ways, because it provides all kinds of organic, unexpected events to happen before the camera that I can't write an algorithm for. And we did a lot of that in Tree of Life for Terry Malick a couple of years ago. And so we're using a lot of Joe's equipment to actually shoot the old way as well. But even if you shoot the old way, even if you shot with film, if you do it 120 frames a second and put it up on the screen in 3D, a whole nother new thing starts to happen. So it's really fun. We're having a great time. We don't have any particular agenda about any particular way to do it. It's just that we found this new territory to explore, and it's just open for anybody to come and throw in their 2 cents and help us. Say, well, what would you do with animation, or what would you do with whatever? We've got Cirque du Soleil coming down. They want to augment their live shows with projected stuff that looks like it's real, not stuff that looks like a movie. Things like that. There's just all kinds of things that are hopefully going to be happening if we could survive as a business.
Well, I think we're out of time. I think hopefully Doug will be able to stay for just a minute or two later, but please join me in thanking Doug for an amazing presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.